Welcome back everyone, and thank you for joining the channel today, where curiosity meets history and everyday objects turn into extraordinary stories, because in this video we are diving deep into one of the most fascinating and controversial tales in modern numismatics, a story that has captured the imagination of collectors, treasure hunters, and casual pocket change checkers alike. The legendary 1988 quarter dollar that has been rumored, debated, analyzed, and passionately discussed as being worth up to an astonishing $18 million, not because it is made of gold or diamonds, not because it commemorates a famous event or person, but because of a rare convergence of errors, minting mistakes, transitional anomalies, die varieties, and extraordinary circumstances that together create a perfect storm of value, mystery, and possibility. And whether you are a seasoned collector or someone who just found an old quarter in a drawer, this story invites you to look closer at the small details that can turn ordinary coins into life-changing discoveries. So settle in as we explore how a seemingly common 1988 Denver minted Washington quarter could, under the rarest of conditions, reach a value that rivals fine art and historic treasures, starting with the context of the 1988 quarter itself, which at first glance appears entirely ordinary. Struck at the Denver Mint with a mintage numbering in the hundreds of millions during the final years before the state quarters program transformed circulating coinage, composed of the standard copper nickel-clad layers with a copper core and cupronickel outer layers, bearing the familiar obverse portrait of George Washington designed by John Flanagan and the traditional eagle reverse that had been in use since 1932, and because of this high mintage and conventional design, most 1988 quarters in circulated condition are worth only face value, which makes the idea of one being worth millions sound impossible. Yet history has shown repeatedly that the most valuable coins often begin as the most ordinary, and what elevates a single specimen into the realm of legend is not its intended design but the unintended deviations that occurred during its creation. And in the case of the rumored $18,001,988 quarter, the conversation begins with a rare combination of errors rather than a single mistake, because while many error coins exist and some are worth hundreds or thousands of dollars, the leap into multi-million-dollar territory requires something extraordinary, something that challenges established knowledge of minting processes and survives scrutiny by experts, grading services, metallurgists, and historians. And one of the most discussed possibilities surrounding this coin is that it may have been struck on the wrong planchet entirely, potentially on a transitional or experimental planchet that was never meant for public circulation, such as a silver planchet, a foreign planchet, or even a test alloy that was being evaluated internally by the mint during the late 1980s as rising metal costs and technological changes prompted discussions about future coin compositions. And if a 1988 quarter were struck on a solid silver or high silver content planchet weighing significantly more than standard, with metallurgical analysis confirming the composition and matching it to no known regular issue, the implications would be enormous, especially if documentation or die linkage suggested that only one or two such pieces could have escaped the mint, because rarity multiplied by historical significance is a key driver of extreme value. But the story does not end with planchet errors, as another layer of intrigue involves the possibility of a double die obverse or reverse of unprecedented magnitude, not the common minor doubling seen on many coins, but a dramatic hub doubling where entire design elements appear shifted, doubled, or rotated, potentially combined with misalignment between obverse and reverse. And if such a double die were paired with other errors like off-metal striking, the resulting coin would be a unique artifact representing multiple independent failures within the minting process, something that theoretically should not happen but occasionally does. And collectors are willing to pay immense sums for proof that even the most controlled industrial systems are still subject to chance. And adding to this is the discussion of a wrong mint mark or an altered mint mark scenario, where a Denver Mint coin might display characteristics inconsistent with known Denver dies, leading to speculation that it was struck using a die intended for another facility or even an experimental die prepared with different specifications. And while mint marks are punched into working dies rather than coins, the late 1980s were a time of change and modernization at the mint, and errors related to die preparation, over-punching, or even the accidental use of a prototype die cannot be completely ruled out, especially when paired with other anomalies. And perhaps the most captivating aspect of the $18 million valuation comes from the idea of a mule error, a coin struck with an obverse and reverse that were never meant to be paired together, such as a Washington quarter obverse combined with a reverse from another denomination or series. And while famous mules like the Sacagawea dollar and Washington quarter mule are known and extremely valuable, the possibility of a previously unknown mule involving a 1988 D quarter would shake the numismatic world, especially if it involved a design that was not officially released until years later or one that was retired decades earlier, because such a pairing would raise profound questions about die storage, testing, and security within the mint. And these questions add narrative value that collectors crave, because coins are not just metal, they are stories frozen in time, and the deeper and more mysterious the story, the higher the price collectors are willing to pay. But beyond physical errors, there is also the factor of condition, because for a coin to reach a valuation in the millions, it must be preserved in extraordinary state, potentially mint state 68 or higher, with full luster, sharp strikes, no post-mint damage, and exceptional eye appeal. And when error coins are found, they are often damaged or heavily circulated, which limits their value. So the hypothetical $18,001,988 D quarter would need to have survived in near perfect condition, perhaps saved by a mint employee, set aside by a collector who noticed something unusual, or simply overlooked in a roll and preserved by chance. And the condition becomes even more critical if the coin exhibits multiple errors, because the more errors present, the more fragile the striking process likely was, making high-grade survivors exponentially rarer. And another layer of speculation involves authentication and pedigree, because a coin's value is not determined by errors alone but also by the credibility of its provenance. And if this quarter were accompanied by documentation, such as internal mint records, test reports, or correspondence confirming the existence of experimental strikes or mishaps during 1988, the value would skyrocket, because collectors pay premiums for certainty, and even rumors of such documentation can inflate values in private negotiations. And this is where the $18 million figure often enters the conversation, not necessarily as a public auction result but as a rumored private offer or valuation discussed among elite collectors who compete fiercely for unique pieces. And in the high-end numismatic market, prices are often set behind closed doors, with confidentiality agreements and private treaties, meaning that the public may never see official confirmation of such a sale, only whispers that circulate through forums, trade shows, and collector circles. And these whispers gain credibility when respected experts acknowledge that such a valuation is theoretically possible given the right combination of factors. And speaking of factors, metallurgical anomalies are another critical piece of the puzzle, because some of the most valuable coins in history are those struck on compositions that should not exist. And if advanced testing were to reveal that a 1988 D quarter contains trace elements or alloy ratios inconsistent with any known U.S. coinage or foreign planchet, it would suggest experimental metallurgy, contamination, or unauthorized planchet use, all of which would be of immense interest to historians and collectors. And the uniqueness of such a composition could alone justify a seven-figure valuation, which when combined with other errors could push the coin into the eight-figure range. And then there is the matter of timing, because the late 1980s were a transitional period for the U.S. Mint, with discussions about cost efficiency, automation, and future programs. And transitional errors, where dies, planchets, or processes from different eras overlap, are particularly prized. And if the 1988 D quarter were proven to be part of a transitional phase that was never publicly acknowledged, it would represent a missing link in the mint's history, something collectors would compete intensely to own. And competition drives prices upward dramatically, especially when the number of potential buyers is small but their resources are vast. And this brings us to the psychology of collecting, because the value of an $18 million coin is not purely rational, it is driven by desire, status, and the human impulse to own something that no one else can. Next, 1995 P quarter dollar. Today we are diving into another mind-bending numismatic mystery that has captivated collectors, historians, and everyday people who suddenly look twice at the coins in their pockets. And this time the spotlight falls on a seemingly ordinary coin that almost everyone has handled without a second thought, the 1995 P Washington quarter dollar. A coin that under normal circumstances is worth exactly 25 cents, yet under an extraordinary and extremely rare set of conditions has been rumored, debated, and passionately discussed as being worth as much as $17 million, a figure that sounds unbelievable until you begin to unravel the layers of errors, minting mistakes, transitional anomalies, production irregularities, and once-in-a-generation coincidences that together could elevate a single example of this coin into the realm of legendary treasures. And this story is not just about metal and machinery, it is about how complex systems can fail in fascinating ways, how rarity is born from accidents, and how the smallest details can completely redefine value. So as we begin this journey, imagine holding a 1995 p quarter in your hand, the Philadelphia Mint mark, or rather the absence of a mint mark as is standard for Philadelphia issues, the familiar portrait of George Washington on the obverse, the eagle with outstretched wings on the reverse, the copper nickel-clad composition that defined circulating quarters for decades, and nothing about it appears unusual at first glance, because the Philadelphia Mint struck hundreds of millions of quarters in 1995, making it one of the most common dates in circulation. Yet it is precisely this ordinariness that makes the idea of a $17 million example so compelling, because when a coin from such an abundant year becomes priceless, the explanation can only lie in something extraordinary that went wrong during its creation, and to understand how this could happen, we need to explore the minting process itself, because coins are created through a carefully controlled sequence of steps involving planchet preparation, die creation, striking pressure, alignment, inspection, and quality control, and each of these steps is an opportunity for something rare and unintended to occur, and in the case of the legendary 1995 p quarter, the theory is not centered on a single simple error, but on the convergence of multiple high-impact anomalies that together form a unique and possibly one-of-a-kind specimen, starting with one of the most discussed possibilities, that the coin was struck on an entirely wrong planchet, and not just any wrong planchet, but one that fundamentally contradicts what should exist in 1995, such as a silver planchet, a foreign planchet, or an experimental alloy that was never authorized for circulation. Because while silver quarters had not been produced for circulation since 1964, the mint still handled silver planchets for commemoratives, proofs, and other special issues, and the possibility, however remote, that a silver or silver-rich planchet could have entered the regular production line in Philadelphia during 1995 creates the foundation for immense value, because a genuine 1995 p quarter struck on a silver planchet would immediately stand out by weight, sound, and metallurgical composition, and if authenticated by multiple independent laboratories and grading services, it would already command a massive premium. But the $17 million valuation suggests something even more extreme, such as the coin being struck on a transitional experimental planchet, because the mid-1990s were a time when the mint was actively studying cost reduction, metal durability, and alternative compositions for future coinage, including alloys that were tested internally but never released. And if a quarter were accidentally struck on such a test planchet and then escaped the mint, it would represent a physical artifact of a hidden chapter in mint history, something that collectors would fight fiercely to own, and that fight could easily push the price into eight-figure territory, especially if only one example were known. But the planchet alone is not the end of the story, because another major factor involves die errors of exceptional magnitude, such as a dramatic double die obverse or reverse, far beyond the subtle doubling that appears on many coins, and instead involving strong, unmistakable separation of design elements, such as doubled lettering, multiple profiles of Washington's face, or a ghosted eagle on the reverse, all caused by a misaligned hubbing process during die creation. And while double dies are known and collected, a previously undocumented and extreme double die from 1995 p would already be a major discovery, but when combined with other anomalies, its value multiplies exponentially. And this leads into the discussion of misalignment and off-center striking, because if the planchet were improperly seated during striking, the resulting coin could display incomplete design elements, distorted rims, or unusual spacing that further differentiate it from normal issues. And while off-center strikes alone are not worth millions, their presence alongside other rare errors adds complexity and uniqueness is the currency of the ultra-high-end collectible market. And another layer of intrigue involves the possibility of a mule error, one of the most fascinating types of mint mistakes, where a coin is struck using an obverse die and a reverse die that were never meant to be paired together, and while the most famous mule errors involve different denominations or entirely different series, the idea that a 1995 P-quarter could have been struck with a reverse from another coin, perhaps a foreign coin, a commemorative, or even a prototype design, is tantalizing, because such an error would raise serious questions about die handling and security within the mint, and if such a mule were confirmed, it would instantly become one of the most important error coins ever discovered, and this importance translates directly into value, because collectors are not just buying rarity, they are buying a piece of institutional history that exposes how even highly regulated systems can produce anomalies. And speaking of systems, another possibility that fuels the $17 million valuation is the idea of a wrong die alloy or improper die hardening process, which could result in unusual surface textures, strike characteristics, or microscopic features that cannot be replicated, and while these details may seem minor, they become critical when experts examine a coin under magnification and compare it to known standards, and deviations that cannot be explained by wear or damage become evidence of something extraordinary, and beyond physical errors. There is also the concept of transitional design elements, because although the State Quarters program did not officially begin until 1999, the designs were conceptualized and tested years earlier, and if a 1995 P-quarter were found to display any design features, inscriptions, or layout characteristics that resemble later State Quarter elements, it would suggest an unauthorized test strike or die experiment, something that should never have entered circulation, and such a discovery would fundamentally alter our understanding of the program's development timeline, making the coin historically invaluable, and historical value often surpasses even rarity in driving prices, because history cannot be recreated, and collectors pay premiums for artifacts that rewrite narratives. And another factor that cannot be ignored is condition, because for a coin to be valued at $17 million, it must not only be rare and significant, but also exceptionally preserved, potentially in mint state 68, 69, or even higher, with full original luster, sharp details, and no evidence of post-mint damage, and this is particularly remarkable for an error coin, because the processes that create errors often also create weaknesses that lead to damage or rejection, meaning that surviving examples are usually flawed, so a high-grade survivor would be exponentially rarer than the error itself, and rarity squared is how prices explode. And adding to this is the role of authentication and certification, because the high-end market relies heavily on trusted third-party grading services, and a coin of this magnitude would need to be examined, tested, and verified by multiple authorities, including numismatic experts, metallurgists, and historians, and the more scrutiny it survives, the more confidence buyers have, and confidence fuels aggressive bidding, and in private sales, confidence can turn into staggering numbers, especially when wealthy collectors view such a coin as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And this brings us to the issue of provenance, because a coin's story matters almost as much as the coin itself, and if the 1995 P-quarter were accompanied by a credible chain of ownership, perhaps tracing back to a mint employee, an estate, or an early discovery documented decades ago, it would add legitimacy and mystique is a powerful driver of value, because collectors are drawn to stories that feel almost mythical, and the idea that a $17 million coin could have sat unnoticed for years adds an element of romance that money alone cannot buy, and this romance is amplified by the secrecy that often surrounds high-value coins, because many of the world's most expensive numismatic transactions occur privately, without public auction records, meaning that values are often inferred from rumors, insurance appraisals, or confidential negotiations. Next, 1997 P-quarter dollar, today, because what we are about to explore is one of those stories that completely changes the way you look at everyday objects, especially the loose change you might be carrying right now, and today's journey takes us into the fascinating and almost unbelievable legend of the 1997 P Washington quarter dollar, a coin that most people would glance at and immediately spend without a second thought, yet under an extraordinarily rare and complex set of circumstances has been rumored, theorized, and intensely discussed as being worth as much as $16 million, a value that seems outrageous until you begin to understand how a perfect storm of minting errors, production mistakes, transitional anomalies, experimental possibilities, and historical timing could transform a common modern coin into one of the most valuable numismatic treasures imaginable. And this story is not just about money, it is about how rarity is born from imperfection, how value emerges from mistakes, and how even in an age of advanced technology and quality control, extraordinary accidents can still happen. So as we dive into this topic, imagine holding a 1997 P quarter in your hand, struck at the Philadelphia Mint, bearing no mint mark as was standard for that facility, displaying the familiar obverse portrait of George Washington and the long-used heraldic eagle reverse, composed of the standard copper nickel-clad layers that had been used for decades, and with a mintage in the hundreds of millions. This coin is among the most common quarters ever produced, which makes the idea of one example being worth $16 million almost absurd on the surface, yet history has repeatedly shown that the most valuable coins often start as the most ordinary, and what separates a priceless artifact from pocket change is not intention, but deviation. And to understand how such a deviation could occur, we need to explore the minting process itself, because every coin begins its life as a planchet, a blank piece of metal punched from strips of alloy, then annealed, cleaned, and fed into high-speed presses where engraved dies strike the designs onto both sides under immense pressure, and each stage is designed to be precise and repeatable, yet each stage also introduces opportunities for rare and sometimes spectacular errors. And the legendary valuation attached to the 1997 P quarter is not based on a single small mistake, but on the possibility of multiple high significance anomalies occurring together in a way that creates a unique, possibly one-of-a-kind coin, starting with one of the most important and valuable types of errors in numismatics, the wrong planchet error, because if a 1997 P quarter were struck on a planchet that was never intended for it, the implications could be enormous. And this is especially intriguing given the context of the mid to late 1990s, a period when the United States Mint was actively preparing for the upcoming state quarters program while also experimenting with alloys, finishes, and production techniques behind the scenes. And while the state quarters did not officially debut until 1999, the planning, testing, and experimental striking began years earlier, which opens the door to the possibility that a 1997 quarter could have been struck on an experimental or transitional planchet, perhaps one intended for testing durability, color, electromagnetic signature for vending machines, or long-term wear characteristics. And if such a planchet differed significantly in composition from standard clad coinage and was never authorized for release, the discovery of a genuine circulation strike on that material would represent an unprecedented error, especially if metallurgical analysis revealed a composition that does not match any known US or foreign coinage. And rarity on this level, combined with documented scientific verification, is a foundational element of multi-million-dollar valuations. But the intrigue does not stop there, because another possibility involves the use of a silver or silver-rich planchet, and while silver quarters were no longer produced for circulation after 1964, the Mint continued to strike silver coins for proofs, commemoratives, and special collector issues, meaning that silver planchets were still present in Mint facilities. And although quality control procedures are designed to prevent cross-contamination, history has shown that rare silver-clad or solid silver errors do escape, and a confirmed 1997 P quarter struck on silver would already be worth an extraordinary sum, but the $16 million figure suggests something even rarer, such as a planchet composed of an experimental silver alloy or a multi-layer composite that was never officially released, and when combined with other anomalies, the value multiplies rapidly. And this leads us into the realm of die errors, because the dies used to strike coins are themselves created through a complex hubbing process, and errors at this stage can produce dramatic results, such as double die obverse or reverses where design elements appear duplicated, offset, or distorted. And while many double dies are subtle and command modest premiums, an extreme and previously unknown double die from 1997 P, especially one showing bold separation in lettering, Washington's profile, or the eagle's wings, would be a landmark discovery. And if such a die error were paired with a wrong planchet strike, the resulting coin would be exponentially rarer than either error alone, because the likelihood of both occurring on the same coin is extraordinarily low, and collectors value improbability as much as rarity, because improbability tells a story of chance overcoming control, and another layer of fascination comes from the possibility of die misalignment or rotational errors, where the obverse and reverse are not properly aligned, resulting in a coin that displays an unusual orientation when flipped. And while rotational errors are known, a severe rotation combined with other major anomalies adds another unique characteristic, further distinguishing the coin from all known examples. And uniqueness is the ultimate driver of top-tier value, because collectors at the highest levels are not content with rare, they want singular, they want the only one. And the idea that a 1997 P quarter could exist as a one-of-one specimen is what fuels valuations in the eight-figure range. And perhaps one of the most captivating possibilities discussed among experts is the idea of a mule error, where a coin is struck using an obverse die and a reverse die that were never meant to be paired together. And mule errors are among the most famous and valuable mistakes in U.S. coinage, because they reveal deep procedural failures and challenge assumptions about die control. And if a 1997 P quarter were struck with a reverse intended for another denomination, a foreign coin, or even a prototype or test design related to the upcoming state quarters program, the historical significance would be immense, because it would suggest that experimental dies were present in production areas earlier than officially acknowledged, and such a discovery would rewrite part of mint history, and collectors pay enormous premiums for coins that force historians to update the record. Because these coins are not just collectibles, they are evidence, and evidence carries weight beyond metal value. And speaking of history, the timing of 1997 is critical, because it sits at the crossroads between the old and the new, the final years of the traditional Washington quarter design and the dawn of the most ambitious circulating commemorative program in U.S. history. And transitional errors from such periods are especially prized, because they represent moments of change. And if a 1997 P quarter exhibited any subtle design cues, spacing changes, or stylistic elements that align more closely with later state quarter dies, it would suggest unauthorized or accidental early testing, and even the faintest hint of such a transition, when confirmed by expert analysis, could elevate the coin's importance dramatically. And beyond visible design features, there are also microscopic characteristics that experts examine, such as die polish lines, tool marks, strike pressure indicators, and surface texture, and deviations in these areas can reveal whether a coin was struck under unusual conditions, perhaps using improperly hardened dies, incorrect striking pressure, or experimental press settings. And while these details are invisible to the naked eye, they become crucial when establishing that a coin does not fit within known production norms, and establishing that something does not fit is often more powerful than identifying exactly what it is, because it confirms uniqueness. And another essential component of the $16 million valuation is condition, because rarity alone is not enough at the highest levels, the coin must also be exceptionally well preserved, and this is particularly challenging for error coins, because the same forces that create errors often lead to rejection, damage, or destruction, meaning that surviving examples are frequently flawed or circulated. So a high-grade example, potentially mint state 68 or higher, with full luster, sharp detail, and minimal contact marks, would be astonishing, and the existence of such a pristine survivor would dramatically increase value, because it suggests that the coin was recognized as unusual early on and preserved carefully, or that it somehow escaped circulation entirely. And preservation adds another layer of improbability to an already improbable object. And then there is the matter of authentication and certification. Last, 1998 quarter dollar, today, because we are about to dive into a story that might make you look at the coins in your pocket a little differently, a story that combines history, mystery, rarity, and the extraordinary idea that something as ordinary as a 1998 P Washington quarter could potentially be worth $15 million under the right circumstances. And while that number may sound impossible at first, when you begin to explore the fascinating combination of minting errors, production anomalies, experimental possibilities, and extraordinary conditions that could create such value, it starts to make a little more sense. And this is not just a story about money, but about the way chance, human error, and technical processes can collide to produce something that transcends its ordinary purpose. So imagine holding a 1998 P quarter in your hand, struck at the Philadelphia Mint, with no mint mark, bearing the familiar portrait of George Washington on the obverse and the heraldic eagle on the reverse, composed of the standard copper-nickel-clad composition. exactly like hundreds of millions of other quarters produced that year, yet somewhere within the vast production, a single coin may have emerged that defies everything collectors expect, and the first factor that often comes into play in these high-value coin stories is the planchet on which the coin is struck. Because while most 1998 P quarters were struck on standard clad planchets, there exists the possibility, however remote, that a coin could have been struck on a planchet that was never intended for circulation, such as a silver or silver-rich planchet, a foreign planchet, or even an experimental alloy being tested by the mint in preparation for future coinage programs. And during the late 1990s, the mint was exploring options for durability, cost efficiency, and even electromagnetic properties to ensure coins would function properly in vending machines and coin-operated devices, meaning that experimental planchets were present in the facilities, and while quality control is rigorous, history has shown that occasional mistakes allow rare experimental or transitional planchets to enter circulation, and if a 1998 P quarter were struck on such a planchet, metallurgical testing would reveal compositions that do not match any officially released coinage, creating a level of rarity that is almost impossible to replicate, and rarity at this magnitude is one of the cornerstones of extreme value. But the story does not stop at the planchet, because die errors are another critical component, and dies themselves are created through a hubbing process that involves multiple steps and can introduce dramatic errors, such as strong double dies where entire design elements are duplicated, shifted, or distorted, or even more extreme errors where partial striking, misalignment, or hub rotation causes ghosted images, doubled letters, or doubled features on the portrait or the eagle, and while minor double dies exist in moderate quantities, a coin exhibiting a bold, previously undocumented double die from 1998 P would be exceedingly rare, and if such a die error coincided with a planchet anomaly, the combined probability of both occurring on a single coin would be astronomically low, making it unique, and uniqueness is the ultimate driver of value in the high-end coin market. Because collectors at this level are not interested in rarity alone, they want a one-of-a-kind piece that no one else in the world can claim, and that desire drives prices far beyond what casual observers might expect. And in addition to planchet and die anomalies, the possibility of off-center strikes or misaligned obverse and reverse further adds to the intrigue, because if a planchet were improperly seated or a press malfunctioned slightly, the resulting coin could display incomplete design elements, distorted rims, or unusual spacing between features. And while off-center coins are collected, extreme cases combined with other major errors can create an object that is truly extraordinary. And another factor that collectors consider is the possibility of a mule error, where a coin is struck with an obverse die and a reverse die that were never intended to be paired together, and the history of mules demonstrates how valuable they can be, because they represent failures in procedural control and often reveal hidden aspects of mint operations. And if a 1998 P quarter were struck with a reverse from another denomination, a foreign coin, or even a prototype for the upcoming state quarters program, the historical significance would be immense, as it would indicate the existence of dies in production or testing areas well before they were officially used, rewriting part of the timeline for the mint. And such a discovery would transform the coin from a mere error into a historically important artifact, something that commands both numismatic and scholarly attention. And beyond visible design errors, microscopic features are also crucial, because experts examine die polish lines, tool marks, strike pressure, and surface textures to determine whether a coin was struck under unusual conditions, and deviations in these areas, even subtle ones, can confirm that a coin does not belong to the known normal production run. And this kind of scientific verification is essential to support claims of extreme value, because collectors and investors want certainty when discussing multi-million-dollar coins. And speaking of extreme value, condition is another vital factor, because for a coin to approach a valuation like $15 million, it must not only be rare and historically significant, but also be in exceptional preservation, potentially mint state 68 or higher, with full luster, sharp strikes, and minimal contact marks. And surviving in such pristine condition is particularly challenging for error coins, because the forces that create anomalies often lead to rejection, post-mint damage, or circulation, meaning that a perfect specimen is exponentially rarer than the error itself. And when a coin is unique, historically significant, struck on an extraordinary planchet, and preserved in near-perfect condition. The combination of factors is what can drive prices into the multi-million-dollar range, and then there is the matter of authentication, because claims at this level require extensive verification, including expert analysis, grading by top-tier services, and advanced metallurgical testing to confirm composition and rule out counterfeits, and the more scrutiny a coin survives, the stronger its provenance, and provenance itself plays a huge role in high-end valuations, because knowing where a coin came from, whether an estate, a private collection, or even indirectly connected to mint operations, adds legitimacy and narrative weight. And narrative is almost as important as physical characteristics in driving value, because collectors are drawn to stories that feel authentic, rare, and almost mythical, and when a coin has a compelling story alongside scientific verification and extraordinary preservation, it becomes more than a coin, it becomes a symbol of history, chance, and discovery, and this is why rumors and private discussions around a $15,001,998 P quarter persist, because even without public auction records, the combination of rarity, historical significance, anomalies, and condition makes the valuation plausible in the eyes of experts and serious collectors, and beyond the technical aspects, the timing of the 1998 production is particularly interesting, because it sits just before the introduction of the State Quarters program, during a period of experimentation and transition within the mint, when testing for future designs, compositions, and striking techniques may have coincided with normal production, creating opportunities for errors that would never recur. And transitional errors are some of the most prized among collectors, because they capture a moment in time that is otherwise undocumented, and this potential historical context elevates the coin far above standard errors, making it both a numismatic and historical treasure. And all of these factors, the wrong planchet, die anomalies, extreme double dies, misalignment, mule possibilities, microscopic deviations, perfect preservation, authentication, provenance, historical context, and narrative, combine to create a hypothetical scenario in which a 1998 P quarter could command a value as high as $15 million, and while the vast majority of 1998 P quarters are worth only face value, the very existence of a potential one-of-a-kind specimen drives fascination, research, and speculation in the collecting community, inspiring people to examine their coins more closely, learn about errors and minting processes, and dream of discovery, and this fascination is compounded by the psychological aspect of high-end collecting, because owning a singular coin of this nature is about more than money, it is about status, legacy, and a tangible connection to history, and in the ultra-high-end numismatic market, competition among collectors can drive prices beyond rational expectation, as unique objects become symbols of achievement and prestige, and this is why stories like the 1998 P quarter endure, because they remind us that extraordinary value can be hidden in the ordinary, that mistakes can become treasures, and that even in a modern, highly controlled environment, chance and human error can still produce objects that captivate, challenge, and inspire. And as we reflect on this legend,